Pas de soleil, 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 pas de soleil.
Sydney is the capital city of the state of New South Wales, and the most populous city in Australia and Oceania. Located on Australia's east coast, the metropolis surrounds Port Jackson and extends about 70 kilometres on its periphery towards the Blue Mountains to the west, Hawkesbury to the north, the Royal National Park to the south and MacArthur to the southwest. Sydney is made up of 658 suburbs, spread across 33 local government areas. Informally, there are at least 15 regions. Residents of the city are known as Sydneysiders. As of June 2020, Sydney's estimated metropolitan population was 5,367,206, meaning the city is home to approximately 66% of the state's population. Indigenous Australians have inhabited the Sydney area for at least 30,000 years, and thousands of engravings remain throughout the region, making it one of the richest in Australia in terms of Aboriginal archaeological sites. Around 29 clan groups of the Eora Nation inhabited the region at the time of European contact. During his first Pacific voyage in 1770, Lieutenant James Cook and his crew became the first Europeans to chart the eastern coast of Australia, making landfall at Botany Bay and inspiring British interest in the area. In 1788, the first fleet of convicts, led by Arthur Phillip, founded Sydney as a British penal colony, the first European settlement in Australia. Phillip named the settlement after Thomas Townsend, 1st Viscount Sydney. Penal transportation to New South Wales ended soon after Sydney was incorporated as a city in 1842. A gold rush occurred in the colony in 1851, and over the next century, Sydney transformed from a colonial outpost into a major global cultural and economic centre. After World War II, it experienced mass migration and became one of the most multicultural cities in the world. At the time of the 2011 census, more than 250 different languages were spoken in Sydney. In the 2016 census, about 35.8% of residents spoke a language other than English at home. Furthermore, 45.4% of the population reported having been born overseas, and the city has the third largest foreign-born population of any city in the world after London and New York City. Between 1971 and 2018, Sydney lost a net number of 716,832 people to the rest of Australia, but its population has continued to grow, largely due to immigration. Despite being one of the most expensive cities in the world, Sydney frequently ranks in the top 10 most livable cities in the world. It is classified as an Alpha Global City by Globalization and World Cities Research Network, indicating its influence in the region and throughout the world. Ranked 11th in the world for economic opportunity, Sydney has an advanced market economy with strengths in finance, manufacturing and tourism. There is a significant concentration of foreign banks and multinational corporations in Sydney, and the city is promoted as Australia's financial capital and one of Asia-Pacific's leading financial hubs. Established in 1850, the University of Sydney was Australia's first university and is regarded as one of the world's leading universities. Sydney is also home to the oldest library in Australia, the State Library of New South Wales, opened in 1826. Sydney has hosted major international sporting events such as the 2000 Summer Olympics. The city is among the top 15 most visited cities in the world, with millions of tourists coming each year to see the city's landmarks. Boasting over 1 million hectares of nature reserves and parks, its notable natural features include Sydney Harbour, the Royal National Park, Royal Botanic Garden and Hyde Park, the oldest parkland in the country. Built attractions such as the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the World Heritage-listed Sydney Opera House are also well known to international visitors. The main passenger airport serving the metropolitan area is Kingsford Smith Airport, one of the world's oldest continually operating airports. Established in 1906, Central Station, the largest and busiest railway station in the state, is the main hub of the city's rail network. History. First inhabitants. The first people to inhabit the area now known as Sydney were Indigenous Australians who had migrated from northern Australia and before that from Southeast Asia. While radiocarbon dating has shown evidence of human activity in the Sydney area from around 30,000 years ago, Aboriginal stone tools found in Western Sydney's gravel sediments indicate there was human settlement in the region from as far back as 45,000 to 50,000 years BP. The first meeting between the native people and the British occurred on the 29th of April 1770 when Lieutenant James Cook landed at Botany Bay on the Kurnell Peninsula and encountered the Guigal clan. He noted in his journal that they were confused and somewhat hostile towards the foreign visitors. Cook was on a mission of exploration and was not commissioned to start a settlement. He spent a short time collecting food and conducting scientific observations before continuing further north along the east coast of Australia and claiming the new land he had discovered for Britain. Prior to the arrival of the British, there were 4,000 to 8,000 native people in Sydney from as many as 29 different clans. The earliest British settlers called the natives Eora people. Eora is the term the indigenous population used to explain their origins upon first contact with the British. Its literal meaning is, from this place. Sydney Cove from Port Jackson to Petersham was inhabited by the Cadigal clan. The principal language groups were Darug, Guringai, and Darawal. The earliest Europeans to visit the area noted that the indigenous people were conducting activities such as camping and fishing, using trees for bark and food, collecting shells, and cooking fish. Establishment of the colony. Britain. Before that, England and Ireland had for a long time been sending their convicts across the Atlantic to the American colonies. That trade was ended with the Declaration of Independence by the United States in 1776. Britain decided in 1786 to found a new penal outpost in the territory discovered by Cook some 16 years earlier. Captain Phillip led the first fleet of 11 ships and about 850 convicts into Botany Bay on the 18th of January 1788, though deemed the location unsuitable due to poor soil and a lack of fresh water. He traveled a short way further north and arrived at Sydney Cove on the 26th of January 1788. This was to be the location for the new colony. Phillip described Port Jackson as being, without exception, the finest harbour in the world. The colony was at first to be titled New Albion, but Phillip decided on Sydney. The official proclamation and naming of the colony happened on the 7th of February 1788. Lieutenant William Dawes produced a town plan in 1790, but it was ignored by the colony's leaders. Sydney's layout today reflects this lack of planning. Between 1788 and 1792, 3,546 male and 766 female convicts were landed at Sydney. Many, professional criminals, with few of the skills required for the establishment of a colony. The food situation reached crisis point in 1790. Early efforts at agriculture were fraught and supplies from overseas were scarce. From 1791 on, however, the more regular arrival of ships and the beginnings of trade lessened the feeling of isolation and improved supplies. The colony was not founded on the principles of freedom and prosperity. Maps from this time show no prison buildings. The punishment for convicts was transportation rather than incarceration, but serious offenses were penalized by flogging and hanging. Phillip sent exploratory missions in search of better soils and fixed on the Parramatta region as a promising area for expansion and moved many of the convicts from late 1788 to establish a small township, which became the main center of the colony's economic life, leaving Sydney Cove only as an important port and focus of social life. Poor equipment and unfamiliar soils and climate continued to hamper the expansion of farming from Farm Cove to Parramatta and Toongabbie, but a building program, assisted by convict labor, advanced steadily. Officers and convicts alike faced starvation as supplies ran low and little could be cultivated from the land. The region's indigenous population was also suffering. It is estimated that half of the native people in Sydney died during the smallpox epidemic of 1789. Enlightened for his age, Phillip's personal intent was to establish harmonious relations with local Aboriginal people and try to reform as well as discipline the convicts of the colony. Phillip and several of his officers, most notably Watkin Tench, left behind journals and accounts which tell of immense hardships during the first years of settlement. Part of Macquarie's effort to transform the colony was his authorization for convicts to re-enter society as free citizens. Roads, bridges, wharves, and public buildings were constructed using convict labor, and by 1822 the town had banks, markets, and well-established thoroughfares. Parramatta Road was opened in 1811, which is one of Sydney's oldest roads and Australia's first highway between two cities, Sydney and Parramatta. Conditions in the colony were not conducive to the development of a thriving new metropolis, but the more regular arrival of ships and the beginnings of maritime trade helped to lessen the burden of isolation. Between 1788 and 1792, convicts and their jailers made up the majority of the population. In one generation, however, a population of emancipated convicts who could be granted land began to grow. These people pioneered Sydney's private sector economy and were later joined by soldiers whose military service had expired, and later still by free settlers who began arriving from Britain. Governor Phillip departed the colony for England on the 11th of December 1792, with the new settlement having survived near starvation and immense isolation for 4 years. Conflicts. Between 1790 and 1816, Sydney became one of the many sites of the Australian Frontier Wars, a series of conflicts between the Kingdom of Great Britain and the resisting Indigenous clans. In 1790, when the British established farms along the Hawkesbury River, an Aboriginal leader Pemulwuy resisted the Europeans by waging a guerrilla-style warfare on the settlers in a series of wars known as the Hawkesbury and Nepean Wars, which took place in western Sydney. He raided farms until Governor Macquarie dispatched troops from the British Army 46th Regiment in 1816 and ended the conflict by killing 14 Indigenous Australians in a raid on their campsite. In 1804, Irish convicts led the Castle Hill Rebellion, a rebellion by convicts against colonial authority in the Castle Hill area of the British colony of New South Wales. The first and only major convict uprising in Australian history, suppressed under martial law, the rebellion ended in a battle fought between convicts and the colonial forces of Australia at Rouse Hill. The Rum Rebellion of 1808 was the only successful armed takeover of government in Australian history, where the Governor of New South Wales, William Bligh, was ousted by the New South Wales Corps under the command of Major George Johnston, who led the rebellion. Conflicts arose between the governors and the officers of the Rum Corps, many of which were landowners such as John MacArthur. Modern development. 19th century. Early Sydney was molded by the hardships suffered by early settlers. In the early years, drought and disease caused widespread problems, but the situation soon improved. The military colonial government was reliant on the army, the New South Wales Corps. Macquarie served as the last autocratic governor of New South Wales, from 1810 to 1821, and had a leading role in the social and economic development of Sydney, which saw it transition from a penal colony to a budding free society. He established public works, a bank, churches, and charitable institutions, and sought good relations with the Aborigines. Over the course of the 19th century, Sydney established many of its major cultural institutions. Governor Lachlan Macquarie's vision for Sydney included the construction of grand public buildings and institutions fit for a colonial capital. Macquarie Street began to take shape as a ceremonial thoroughfare of grand buildings. The year 1840 was the final year of convict transportation to Sydney, which by this time had a population of 35,000. Gold was discovered in the colony in 1851, and with it came thousands of people seeking their fortune. Sydney's population reached 200,000 by 1871, and during this time the city entered a period of prosperity which was reflected in the construction of grand edifices. Temperance coffee palaces, hotels, as well as other civic buildings such as libraries and museums were erected in the city. Demand for infrastructure to support the growing population and subsequent economic activity led to massive improvements to the city's railway and port systems throughout the 1850s and 1860s. After a period of rapid growth, further discoveries of gold in Victoria began drawing new residents away from Sydney towards Melbourne in the 1850s, which created a historically strong rivalry between Sydney and Melbourne. Nevertheless, Sydney exceeded Melbourne's population in the early 20th century and remains Australia's largest city. Following the depression of the 1890s, the 6 colonies agreed to form the Commonwealth of Australia. Sydney's beaches had become popular seaside holiday resorts, but daylight seabathing was considered indecent until the early 20th century. 20th century present. Under the reign of Queen Victoria, Federation of the 6 colonies occurred on the 1st of January 1901. Sydney, with a population of 481,000, then became the state capital of New South Wales. The Great Depression of the 1930s had a severe effect on Sydney's economy, as it did with most cities throughout the industrial world. For much of the 1930s, up to 1 in 3 breadwinners were unemployed. Construction of the Sydney Harbour Bridge served to alleviate some of the effects of the economic downturn by employing 1,400 men between 1924 and 1932. The population continued to boom despite the Depression, having reached 1 million in 1925. The city had one of the largest tram networks in the British Empire until it was dismantled in 1961. When Britain declared war on Germany in 1939, Australia also entered. During the war, Sydney experienced a surge in industrial development to meet the needs of a wartime economy. Far from mass unemployment, there were now labor shortages and women becoming active in male roles. Sydney's harbour was attacked by the Japanese in May and June 1942 with a direct attack from Japanese submarines with some loss of life. Households throughout the city had built air raid shelters and performed drills. Consequently, Sydney experienced population growth and increased cultural diversification throughout the post-war period. The people of Sydney warmly welcomed Queen Elizabeth II in 1954 when the reigning monarch stepped onto Australian soil for the first time to commence her Australian royal tour. Having arrived on the royal yacht Britannia through Sydney Heads, Her Majesty came ashore at Farm Cove. There were 1.7 million people living in Sydney in 1950 and almost 3 million by 1975. The Australian government launched a large-scale multicultural immigration program. New industries such as information technology, education, culture, financial services and the arts have risen. Sydney's iconic Opera House was opened in 1973 by Her Majesty. A new skyline of concrete and steel skyscrapers swept away much of the old low-rise and often sandstone skyline of the city in the 1960s and 1970s, with Australia Square being the tallest building in Sydney from its completion in 1967 until 1976 and is also notable for being the first skyscraper in Australia. This prolific growth of contemporary high-rise architecture was put in check by heritage laws in the 1990s onwards, which prevent the demolition of any structure deemed historically significant. Since the 1970s, Sydney has undergone a rapid economic and social transformation. As a result, the city has become a cosmopolitan melting pot. To relieve congestion on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Sydney Harbour Tunnel opened in August 1992. The 2000 Summer Olympics were held in Sydney and became known as the best Olympic Games ever by the President of the International Olympic Committee. Sydney has maintained extensive political, economic and cultural influence over Australia as well as international renown in recent decades. Following the Olympics, the city hosted the 2003 Rugby World Cup, the APEC Australia 2007 and Catholic World Youth Day 2008, led by Pope Benedict XVI. Geography. Topography. Sydney is a coastal basin with the Tasman Sea to the east, the Blue Mountains to the west, the Hawkesbury River to the north, and the Woronora Plateau to the south. The inner city measures 25 square kilometers, the Greater Sydney region covers 12,367 square kilometers, and the city's urban area is 1,687 square kilometers in size. Sydney spans two geographic regions. The Cumberland Plain lies to the south and west of the harbour and is relatively flat. The Hornsby Plateau is located to the north and is dissected by steep valleys. The flat areas of the south were the first to be developed as the city grew. It was not until the construction of the Sydney Harbour Bridge that the northern reaches of the coast became more heavily populated. 70 beaches can be found along its coastline, with Bondi Beach being one of the most famous. The Nepean River wraps around the western edge of the city and becomes the Hawkesbury River before reaching Broken Bay. Most of Sydney's water storages can be found on tributaries of the Nepean River. The Parramatta River is mostly industrial and drains a large area of Sydney's western suburbs into Port Jackson. The southern parts of the city are drained by the Georges River and the Cooks River into Botany Bay. According to calculations by the Sensible City Lab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 25.9% of Sydney is covered by trees, making it the third largest city in the world with the most trees after Singapore and Oslo, respectively, tying with Vancouver. Geology. Sydney is made up of mostly Triassic rock with some recent igneous dikes and volcanic necks. The Sydney Basin was formed when the Earth's crust expanded, subsided, and filled with sediment in the early Triassic period. The sand that was to become the sandstone of today was washed there by rivers from the south and northwest and laid down between 360 and 200 million years ago. The sandstone has shale lenses and fossil riverbeds. The Sydney Basin bioregion includes coastal features of cliffs, beaches, and estuaries. Deep river valleys known as rias were carved during the Triassic period in the Hawkesbury sandstone of the coastal region where Sydney now lies. The rising sea level between 18,000 and 6,000 years ago flooded the Rias to form estuaries and deep harbors. Port Jackson, better known as Sydney Harbour, is one such ria. Sydney features two major soil types, sandy soils and clay, though some soils may be a mixture of the two. Directly overlying the older Hawkesbury sandstone is the Waianamatta Shale, a geological feature found in western Sydney that was deposited in connection with a large river delta during the Middle Triassic period, which shifted over time from west to east. The Waianamatta Shale generally comprises fine-grained sedimentary rocks such as shales, mudstones, ironstones, siltstones and lamanites, with less common sandstone units. The Waianamatta group is made up of the following units: Bringelly Shale, Minchinbury Sandstone and Ashfield Shale. Ecology. The most prevalent plant communities in the Sydney region are open grassy woodlands and some pockets of dry sclerophyll forests, which consist of eucalyptus trees, casuarinas, melaleucas, corymbias and angophoras, with shrubs, and a semi-continuous grass in the understory. The plants in this community tend to have rough and spiky leaves, as they're grown in areas with low soil fertility. Sydney also features a few areas of wet sclerophyll forests which are found in the wetter, elevated areas in the north and the northeast. These forests are defined by straight, tall tree canopies with a moist understory of soft-leaved shrubs, tree ferns and herbs. Sydney is home to dozens of bird species, which commonly include the Australian raven, Australian magpie, crested pigeon, noisy miner and the pied currawong, among others. Introduced bird species ubiquitously found in Sydney are the common myna, common starling, house sparrow and the spotted dove. Reptile species are also numerous and predominantly include skinks. Sydney has a few mammal and spider species, such as the grey-headed flying fox and the Sydney funnelweb, respectively, and has a huge diversity of marine species inhabiting its harbour and many beaches. Climate. Under the classic system, Sydney has a temperate climate, but under the Köppen-Geiger classification, Sydney has a humid subtropical climate with warm, and sometimes hot, summers and cool, winters, as described by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Historically, rainfall has been fairly uniform throughout the year, although in recent years it has been more summer dominant. At Sydney's primary weather station at Observatory Hill, extreme temperatures have ranged from 45.8 degrees Celsius on the 18th of January 2013 to 2.1 degrees Celsius on the 22nd of June 1932. An average of 14.9 days a year have temperatures at or above 30 degrees Celsius in the Central Business District. In contrast, the metropolitan area averages between 35 and 65 days, depending on the suburb. The highest minimum temperature recorded at Observatory Hill is 27.6 degrees Celsius on the 6th of February 2011, while the lowest maximum temperature is 7.7 degrees Celsius, recorded on the 19th of July 1868. The hottest day in the Sydney metropolitan area occurred in Penrith on the 4th of January 2020, where a high of 48.9 degrees Celsius was recorded. The average annual temperature of the sea ranges from 18.5 degrees Celsius in September to 23.7 degrees Celsius in February. Sydney has an average of 7.2 hours of sunshine per day and 109.5 clear days annually. The weather is moderated by proximity to the ocean, and more extreme temperatures are recorded in the inland western suburbs. Sydney experiences an urban heat island effect. This makes certain parts of the city more vulnerable to extreme heat, including coastal suburbs. In late spring and summer, temperatures over 35 degrees Celsius are not uncommon, though hot, dry conditions are usually ended by a southerly buster, a powerful southerly that brings gale winds and a rapid fall in temperature. Since Sydney borders the Great Dividing Range, it can occasionally experience dry, westerly foehn-like winds, usually between winter and spring, as it lies on the leeward side of the ranges, thereby elevating fire danger in the region. Due to the inland location, frost is recorded early in the morning in western Sydney a few times in winter. Autumn and spring are the transitional seasons, with spring showing a larger temperature variation than autumn. The Bureau of Meteorology reported that 2002 to 2005 were the warmest summers in Sydney since records began in 1859. The summer of 2007-08, however, proved to be the coolest since 1996-97 and is the only summer this century to be at or below average in temperatures. In 2009, dry conditions brought a severe dust storm towards eastern Australia. The El Niño Southern Oscillation, the Indian Ocean Dipole and the Southern Annular Mode play an important role in determining Sydney's weather patterns, drought and bushfire on the one hand, and storms and flooding on the other, associated with the opposite phases of the oscillation. Many areas of the city bordering bushland have experienced bushfires, which tend to occur during the spring and summer. The rainfall has a moderate to low variability and it is spread through the months, though it has been erratic in recent times. Even in its months of highest rainfall, Sydney has relatively few rainy days, with an average mean of 7 to 8 rainy days per month on the 1 mm threshold. Precipitation is usually higher in late summer through to early winter when the subtropical ridge is to the south of Australia, permitting easterly winds to dominate, and lower in late winter to early spring when the subtropical ridge is to the north, as it brings dry winds from the continent's interior towards the city, since it rotates counterclockwise. From 1990 to 1999, Sydney received around 20 thunderstorms per year. In late autumn and winter, east coast lows may bring large amounts of rainfall, especially in the CBD. In spring and summer, black nor'easters are usually the cause of heavy rain events, though other forms of low-pressure areas may also bring heavy deluge and afternoon thunderstorms. Depending on the wind direction, summer weather may be humid or dry, with the late summer-autumn period having a higher average humidity and dew points than late spring, early summer. In summer, most rain falls from thunderstorms and in winter from cold fronts. Snowfall was last reported in the Sydney city area in 1836, while a fall of graupel, or soft hail, was mistaken by many for snow, in July 2008. The city is rarely affected by cyclones, although remnants of ex-cyclones do affect the city. The city is also prone to severe storms. One such storm was the 1999 hailstorm, which produced massive hailstones up to 9 centimeters in diameter. Regions. The regions of Sydney include the CBD or City of Sydney and Inner West, the eastern suburbs, southern Sydney, Greater Western Sydney, and northern Sydney. The Greater Sydney Commission divides Sydney into 5 districts based on the 33 LGAs in the metropolitan area: the Western City, the Central City, the Eastern City, the North District, and the South District. The Australian Bureau of Statistics includes City of Central Coast as part of Greater Sydney for population counts. This adds another 330,000 people to the metropolitan area covered by Greater Sydney Commission. Recent statements by the state government have included the Blue Mountains, the Central Coast, and Wollongong as parts of Greater Sydney. Inner suburbs. The CBD extends about 3 kilometers south from Sydney Cove. It is bordered by Farm Cove within the Royal Botanic Garden to the east and Darling Harbour to the west. Suburbs surrounding the CBD include Woolloomooloo and Potts Point to the east, Surrey Hills and Darlinghurst to the south, Pyrmont and Ultimo to the west, and Millers Point and the Rocks to the north. Most of these suburbs measure less than 1 square kilometre in area. The Sydney CBD is characterised by considerably narrow streets and thoroughfares, created in its convict beginnings in the 18th century. Several localities, distinct from suburbs, exist throughout Sydney's inner reaches. Central and Circular Quay are transport hubs with ferry, rail, and bus interchanges. Chinatown, Darling Harbour, and King's Cross are important locations for culture, tourism, and recreation. The Strand Arcade, which is located between Pitt Street Mall and George Street, is a historical Victorian-style shopping arcade. Opened on the 1st of April 1892, its shop fronts are an exact replica of the original internal shopping facades. Westfield Sydney, located beneath the Sydney Tower, is the largest shopping centre by area in Sydney. There is a long trend of gentrification amongst Sydney's inner suburbs. Pyrmont, located on the harbour, was redeveloped from a centre of shipping and international trade to an area of high-density housing, tourist accommodation, and gambling. Originally located well outside of the city, Darlinghurst is the location of the historic, former Darlinghurst Jail, manufacturing, and mixed housing. It had a period when it was known as an area of prostitution. The terrace-style housing has largely been retained and Darlinghurst has undergone significant gentrification since the 1980s. Green Square is a former industrial area of Waterloo which is undergoing urban renewal worth $8 billion. On the city harbour edge, the historic suburb and wharves of Millers Point are being built up as the new area of Barangaroo. The enforced rehousing of local residents due to the Millers Point, Barangaroo development has caused significant controversy despite the $6 billion worth of economic activity it is expected to generate. The suburb of Paddington is a well-known suburb for its streets of restored terrace houses, Victoria Barracks, and shopping including the weekly Oxford Street markets. Inner West. The Inner West generally includes the Inner West Council, Municipality of Burwood, Municipality of Strathfield, and City of Canada Bay. These span up to about 11 kilometers west of the CBD. Suburbs in the Inner West have historically housed working-class industrial workers, but have undergone gentrification over the 20th century. The region now mainly features medium and high-density housing. Major features in the area include the University of Sydney and the Parramatta River, as well as a large cosmopolitan community and the nightlife hub on King Street in Newtown. The Anzac Bridge spans Johnstons Bay and connects Rozelle to Piermont and the city, forming part of the Western Distributor. The area is serviced by the T1, T2, and T3 railway lines, including the main suburban line, which is the first to be constructed in New South Wales. Strathfield Railway Station is a secondary railway hub within Sydney, and major station on the suburban and northern lines. It was constructed in 1876, and will be a future terminus of Parramatta Light Rail. The area is also serviced by numerous bus routes and cycleways. Other shopping centres in the area include Westfield Burwood and DFO in Homebush. Eastern Suburbs. The eastern suburbs encompass the municipality of Woollahra, the city of Randwick, the Waverley Municipal Council, and parts of the Bayside Council. The Greater Sydney Commission envisions a resident population of 1,338,250 people by 2036 in its eastern city district. They include some of the most affluent and advantaged areas in the country, with some streets being amongst the most expensive in the world. Wolseley Road, in Point Piper, has a top price of $20,900 per square meter, making it the 9th most expensive street in the world. More than 75% of neighborhoods in the electoral district of Wentworth fall under the top decile of SEIFA advantage, making it the least disadvantaged area in the country. Major landmarks include Bondi Beach, a major tourist site, which was added to the Australian National Heritage List in 2008, and Bondi Junction, featuring a Westfield shopping centre and an estimated office workforce of 6,400 by 2035, as well as a train station on the T4 Eastern Suburbs line. The suburb of Randwick contains the Randwick Racecourse, the Royal Hospital for Women, the Prince of Wales Hospital, Sydney Children's Hospital, and the UNSW Kensington campus. Randwick's collaboration area has a baseline estimate of 32,000 jobs by 2036, according to the Greater Sydney Commission. Construction of the CBD and South East Light Rail was completed in April 2020. Main construction was due to be completed in 2018 but was delayed until 2020. The project aims to provide reliable and high-capacity tram services to residents in the city and southeast. Major shopping centres in the area include Westfield Bondi Junction and Westfield East Gardens. Southern Sydney. Southern Sydney includes the suburbs in the local government areas of former Rockdale, Georges River Council, and broadly it also includes the suburbs in the local government area of Sutherland, south of the Georges River. The Kurnell Peninsula, near Botany Bay, is the site of the first landfall on the eastern coastline made by Lieutenant James Cook in 1770. La Pérouse, a historic suburb named after the French navigator Jean-François de Galaup, Comte de la Pérouse, is notable for its old military outpost at Bear Island and the Botany Bay National Park. The suburb of Cronulla in southern Sydney is close to Royal National Park, Australia's oldest national park. Hurstville, a large suburb with a multitude of commercial buildings and high-rise residential buildings dominating the skyline, has become a CBD for the southern suburbs. Northern Sydney. Northern Sydney may also include the suburbs in the Upper North Shore, Lower North Shore and the Northern Beaches. The northern suburbs include several landmarks: Macquarie University, Gladesville Bridge, Ryde Bridge, Macquarie Centre and Curzon Hall in Marsfield. This area includes suburbs in the local government areas of Hornsby Shire, City of Ryde, the municipality of Hunters Hill and parts of the city of Parramatta. The North Shore, an informal geographic term referring to the northern metropolitan area of Sydney, consists of Artarmon, Chatswood, Roseville, Linfield, Killara, Gordon, Pymble, Hornsby and many others. The lower North Shore usually refers to the suburbs adjacent to the harbour such as Neutral Bay, Waverton, Mossman, Cremorne Point, Lavender Bay, Milsons Point, Camaray, Northbridge, and North Sydney. Hunters Hill and Gladesville are often also considered as being part of the Lower North Shore. The Lower North Shore's eastern boundary is Middle Harbor, or at the Roseville Bridge at Castle Cove and Roseville Chase. The Upper North Shore usually refers to the suburbs between Chatswood and Hornsby. It is made up of suburbs located within Ku-ring-gai and Hornsby Shire councils. The North Shore includes the commercial centres of North Sydney and Chatswood. North Sydney itself consists of a large commercial centre, with its own business centre, which contains the second largest concentration of high-rise buildings in Sydney, after the CBD. North Sydney is dominated by advertising, marketing businesses and associated trades, with many large corporations holding office in the region. The Northern Beaches area includes Manly, one of Sydney's most popular holiday destinations for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. The region also features Sydney Heads, a series of headlands which form the 2 kilometers wide entrance to Sydney Harbour. The Northern Beaches area extends south to the entrance of Port Jackson, west to Middle Harbour and north to the entrance of Broken Bay. The 2011 Australian census found the Northern Beaches to be the most white and mono-ethnic district in Australia, contrasting with its more diverse neighbours, the North Shore and the Central Coast. Hills District. The Hills District generally refers to the suburbs in northwestern Sydney including the local government areas of the Hills Shire, parts of the city of Parramatta Council and Hornsby Shire. Actual suburbs and localities that are considered to be in the Hills District can be somewhat amorphous and variable. For example, the Hills District Historical Society restricts its definition to the Hills Shire local government area, yet its study area extends from Parramatta to the Hawkesbury. The region is so named for its characteristically comparatively hilly topography as the Cumberland Plain lifts up, joining the Hornsby Plateau. Several of its suburbs also have hill or hills in their names, such as Balcombe Hills, Castle Hill, Seven Hills, Pendle Hill, Beaumont Hills, and Winston Hills, among others. Windsor and Old Windsor roads are historic roads in Australia, as they are the second and third roads, respectively, laid in the colony. Western Suburbs. The Greater Western Suburbs encompasses the areas of Parramatta, the 6th largest business district in Australia, settled the same year as the Harbour Side Colony, Bankstown, Liverpool, Penrith, and Fairfield. Covering 5,800 square kilometers and having an estimated resident population as at 2017 of 2,288,554, Western Sydney has the most multicultural suburbs in the country. The population is predominantly of a working-class background, with major employment in the heavy industries and vocational trade. Toongabbie is noted for being the third mainland settlement set up after the British colonisation of Australia began in 1788, although the site of the settlement is actually in the separate suburb of Old Toongabbie. The western suburb of Prospect, in the city of Blacktown, is home to Raging Waters, a water park operated by Parks Reunidos. Auburn Botanic Gardens, a botanical garden situated in Auburn, attracts thousands of visitors each year, including a significant number from outside Australia. Another prominent park and garden in the west is Central Gardens Nature Reserve in Maryland's west. The Greater West also includes Sydney Olympic Park, a suburb created to host the 2000 Summer Olympics, and Sydney Motorsport Park, a motorsport circuit located in Eastern Creek. The Boothtown Aqueduct in Greystanes is a 19th-century water bridge that is listed on the New South Wales State Heritage Register as a Site of State Significance. To the northwest, Featherdale Wildlife Park, an Australian zoo in Doonside, near Blacktown, is a major tourist attraction, not just for Western Sydney, but for NSW and Australia. Westfield Parramatta in Parramatta is Australia's busiest Westfield shopping centre, having 28.7 million customer visits per annum. Established in 1799, the Old Government House, a historic house museum and tourist spot in Parramatta, was included in the Australian National Heritage List on 1 August 2007 and World Heritage List in 2010, making it the only site in Greater Western Sydney to be featured in such lists. Moreover, the house is Australia's oldest surviving public building. Prospect Hill, a historically significant ridge in the west and the only area in Sydney with ancient volcanic activity, is also listed on the NSW State Heritage Register. Further to the southwest is the region of MacArthur and the city of Campbelltown, a significant population centre until the 1990s considered a region separate to Sydney proper.